Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. First hour today, we have in studio with us Dr. Alveda King. We're going to be talking with her in just a minute and giving you a chance to hear some of her life lessons and 10 truths for you, your family, and our nation to prosper. It is part of a book called King Rules. You might remember her, since she's been on the program with us before, as the niece of the late civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, and also, of course, in the book talks a great deal about some very important issues that we certainly want to address today here on Point of View. Just going to be a great opportunity to hear from her and to give you a chance to join the conversation. Dr. King is the daughter of the late slain civil rights activist, Dr. Reverend A.D. King, and also of the wife Naomi Barber King. She is the mother of 6 children and lots of grandchildren, and we have certainly appreciated all the things that she has done over the years in her writing. Sons of Thunder, The King Family Legacy, I Don't Want Your Man, I Want My Own, and of course she has a doctorate of laws and is the author of this book, King Rules, 10 Truths for You, Your Family, and Our Nation to Prosper. Dr. King, just great to have you in studio with us.
Kerby, thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity to you and your listening audience.
Let me just mention, too, that people can watch the interview as well as hear it, and so if people like to see what you look like or see our interaction, we certainly make that available today on the website, pointofview.net. Love the book, because if nothing else, we've interviewed you a number of times before. I never knew, for example, where you got your name and how Daddy King gave that to you, and that relates to some of the pro-life issues and some incredible endorsements. I noticed in particular, Dr. Benjamin Carson, who'll be on the program 2 days from now, said that Dr. King places renewed emphasis on the importance of the family as a principal source of values, as a fortress against societal erosion. This is a refreshing look at the forces that led to the greatness of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and can lead to success in our lives. Just one of many accolades you've received. It is published by Nelson Books. We have information about it on our website. We also make it possible, in case you don't have it at your bookstore already, to order it online. And we have a book trailer that people can watch, and we encourage them to hit the share button and pass that on to their friends, maybe in their blog or their Facebook page or others. But thank you so very much for just the honest and vulnerable way in which you talk about your life, because you've had an interesting life being born into that family, but some real heartache, especially when we talk about abortions and other things that have happened in your life.
Well, actually, even when I saw the trailer, it was bittersweet. I was like, oh my God, this is real. I'm going to actually leave something for my children and grandchildren in writing. And hopefully and prayerfully, they and those who come after them, the generations that will follow, will learn from the mistakes, but also from the blessings. And thank goodness there's a scripture, train up a child in the way that he should go, or she, and when the child matures, they won't depart from those lessons. And so I tried to get away from the legacy and from the rules, but I like to say that love brought me back. Even the secret abortions and different things that I did for a short time, my grandfather was there in the mid-70s. And he brought me back. He brought me back.
He brought you into life, if you think about it.
He did.
On the front here, we have the picture of A.D. King, which is your father, Daddy King, which we'll talk about quite a bit in just a minute, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. And really, in a sense, if it weren't for Daddy King, you wouldn't be here, because I First of all, we're going to talk about in a minute where you got your name, but just talk about the fact that your mother, unexpectedly pregnant, thinks that, well, maybe it's time to go to that birth control league, which is kind of the precursor to Planned Parenthood.
Absolutely,
Began to think about abortion, talk to your mother. Oh boy, I could be basically your grandmother, and then they went to Daddy King. Mm-hmm. And you've got to tell the rest of the story, because Daddy King was absolutely convinced that you were in the womb. Talk about that.
It was so amazing because people hear me say, I have a dream. It's in my genes. She's quoting Martin Luther King Jr. She's using his name. Well, my name is Alveda King. Mm-hmm. And the dream that I'm talking about, my granddaddy,
yes.
when my mother and her mother came to him and said, this birth control league says they have a procedure for a mysterious female ailment. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to have a baby now. And he says, Daddy King says, he was their pastor. Nene, they're lying to you. That's not a lump of flesh. That's my granddaughter. She has fair skin and bright red hair, and she's going to bless many people. No ultrasound. He said, I saw her in a dream.
How did he know the gender? And you
he
got to
saw
tell
me
the story.
in a dream 3 years before.
Mm-hmm.
And I was born looking exactly like he said. And my daddy, now it was Dad who named me. Granddaddy saved me through the dream. And Daddy says, well, Al, because my name is Alfred. This is my firstborn. Vitae, Vida, as in French or Italian, Alveda. And then Daddy said Celeste, because his grandmother was Jenny Celeste Parks. Right. And he said, Celeste, we'll get her as close to heaven as possible.
Celestial. Yeah.
Alveda Celeste King was born because Daddy King had a dream.
I just think it's a wonderful story, and it just illustrates again that really from the very beginning of your life, you were destined to be a pro-life leader, as you have been so many years, because most of us know the other story about those abortions that you had, and one of which you didn't even really know what was taking place.
The doctor it was coerced. He just did it. Mm-hmm. And he was respected in the community. You didn't challenge him. And years later, I attended Rachel's Vineyard through Priest for Life.
Yes.
And they said, write one letter, somebody you need to forgive for your abortion. I wrote it to that doctor.
Yes.
And said, I forgive you. You tricked me. You fooled me. But I forgive you.
Yeah, and that's in the book as well. And as I might just point out, a lot of what we're pulling from at the moment is just one of the 10 principles. That's the principle about defend life, number 5. But I do want to spend some time kind of talking about family and home and a number of things. And this really is partially your life story, but it's also what the legacy of the King family is. And you have been really the caretaker for some time of the King legacy. And before we leave this idea of life, you make a really strong case that Martin Luther King Jr., if he were alive, would be a leader in the pro-life movement because he grew up in the King family. And Daddy King, who's the one that, in a sense, saved you and talked your mother out of an abortion and gave you life, in a sense, would probably be instilling those same values in your father, A.D. King, as well as Martin Luther King Jr.
They would follow their father. They always did. They were preachers of the gospel. He was. Daddy King helped to run the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People when he was a young man before they were born.
Yes.
And so he was a civil rights leader in his own right, a preacher, and they would agree with their dad.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about home and family, talking about guarding your heart. We're going to talk about the legacy of the King family. And, of course, a little bit later, if you'd like to join the conversation, we would certainly give you that opportunity, 1-800-351-1212. The book is just out, 200 pages. You can certainly find it in your local bookstore. It is published by, as I mentioned, Thomas Nelson. We also have information on our website. If you don't find it in your bookstore, I'd like to get an advance copy. We have it on our bookstore today. We have that trailer we just mentioned a minute ago, which is about a minute and a half. So I encourage you to watch it. Then hit that share button, put it on your Facebook page, put it on the blog so we can expand the understanding that people have about this. And then as you go to the articles section, you will see we have an article about the book coming out. And then under the web links, we have a web link to Dr. Alveda King. And you will find that is alvedakingministries.com, but we've got the link there as well. So all sorts of resources today on the website, pointofview.net. And if you'd like to talk with Dr. King a little bit later, we'll open up the phones. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the importance of home and family.
Thank you.
And continue our conversations. We talk about this new book just out, King Rules, 10 Truths for You, Your Family, and Our Nation to Prosper. We'll be back right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if we are to be more effective in communicating biblical values and morality, we need to understand basic strategy. That is one of the themes in the book Rules for Patriots by Steve Deace. The middle part of the book provides some needed coaching on how we can all be more effective in communicating and convincing. One of his principles is that we should never accept the premise of your opponent's argument. A premise is the assumption of an argument that is meant to justify a conclusion. A good example would be the pro-life debate. What happens if the premise of the argument is over reproductive choice rather than sanctity of life? The pro-choice side is more likely to win. This can be applied to various constitutional issues. As Christians, we believe that God grants us rights. We have the right to call on Him. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Therefore, government has the responsibility to protect religious freedom through the First Amendment, as well as through other legislative acts. However, the premise in many government discussions is to give rights, and that government gives rights and thus has the right to take away or constrain certain rights. It all depends on the premise that is used to come to that conclusion. God grants us the right to self-defense. Therefore, our government has the obligation to protect and enforce the Second Amendment. However, if you come to a much different conclusion if the debate is about whether individuals should own firearms. Steve Deace was on one talk show where the debate was about how much more taxes should be levied on the rich. When it came time for him to speak, he asked a simple question. How many on the panel and in the studio audience got a job from a poor person? He noted that every job he had came from a rich person. That allowed him to focus the discussion on whether we should punitively punish people who produce jobs. If we're to be effective in communicating biblical values and morality, we should never accept the premise of our opponent's argument. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with us today, Dr. Alveda King, as we talk about King Rules, 10 truths for you and your family and your nation to prosper. You can also go to kingrulesbook.com. We'll have a link to that in just a minute. We also have a link, of course, to Dr. King's website and all sorts of great resources for you. The book just coming out shortly, and if you'd like to get a copy of it, we've made possible for you to order that in advance. Let's, if we can, maybe get into the issue of home. You talk about making home a priority, and I understand that when some people come to Atlanta, you give them kind of a civil rights tour, and one of the things you do is take them to the home of the King family where actually you were born, where your father and mother were. So talk about that for just a minute, because home is very important, family, very important to the King family.
Well, that birth home, the King family birth home, my grandmother, Alberta Williams King, was the only child of her parents, A.D. and his wife, Jenny. And that was their beautiful Victorian home. They lived in a neighborhood, believe it or not, in the Deep South. In those days, it was a blended community with African Americans, well, Negroes back then, and whites and other ethnic groups. And so once she was born, they lived there. Daddy King walked to Atlanta, Georgia from Stockbridge, Georgia, with his shoes on his back because he only had one pair of shoes and he didn't want to get holes in them. He met this Dr. Adam Daniel Williams, and he became his mentor. Granddaddy went to Morehouse and then saw this sweet little honey bunch. That was his name for his wife, and they got married. And they lived there because Daddy, great-granddaddy Williams passed away. They stayed there with the mother. And then they had the 3 children. And then mother and daddy, they moved, and mother and daddy, when they got married, we lived there. So it's been the King family birth home for many, many generations. And today, and if you come to Atlanta, please let me go with you. Yeah. And we go through that home and we get all the memories, and it's a beautiful thing. The parlor where they receive guests, the dining room where Daddy King told his sons and daughter, we have to have a Bible verse before we eat. So Daddy and Uncle ML, AD and ML, Jesus wept, let's eat. Daddy King said, that is in the Bible, but why did Jesus weep? Why did Jesus weep? Yeah. So they learned scriptures, they learned about world events, they learned manners there in that home, in the parlor, in the dining room, throughout the home. And they learned to care for others. They back then, black people really, there weren't many hotels. So visiting ministers got to stay at that home, and evangelists. Yeah. So home was always and still is filled with love. You can live in a palace and be miserable, or a small place and be happy. So home is very important.
That leads to the second principle you talk about there, and that is serve the family, because it's very important to be service. And, of course, at a very young age, almost everybody in that family, I think, was really instilled with the idea of not only serving family, but serving the community, of being involved, of fighting for justice, nonviolence, and the rest. But talk about this idea of serving your family and what that means to you.
Becoming the global family, loving each other. It has never been permitted, even down to this day, and even my grandchildren. We're not permitted to fight and argue. So people hear about the disagreement, even with my cousins today, the Martin Luther King children, but they love each other. They absolutely love each other. And we do things that are loving and kind to each other. So we may even disagree on something politically or socially, but we are taught in our family to love, not to hate.
Well, some great principles. I'm going to keep moving through those because I know some people want to talk with you. So another principle that you talk about is get an education. And that I thought was very striking, because I certainly was aware of the academic career of Martin Luther King Jr. I was not aware of some of the other family members. Of course, we refer to you as Dr. King as well.
Yes.
But I think it is important to, and what a message that needs to be communicated today to the culture that is saying, what's an education worth? You're going to get a lot of student loans and it's probably not worthwhile. But you always have grown up in a family where education was a very high priority.
Education is still a priority in our family. Some of my children are teachers, some are attorneys. One's going to medical school. Dr. King was an early, he attended college early. He was 14 years old when he went to college.
Wow.
His mother was a teacher. His sister was a teacher. I was a college professor 19 years. It goes on and on. Education after Christ. You have to have Christ first. And then a good education, a good family, a good home. All of this is still very important. And people say today, well, why you can't find a job? Well, the world is not going to be horrible forever, but education will stand you in good stead. So we still advise that parents help to guide their children, whether it be a homeschool, private school. Public schools need to be better. I don't think we should just throw out the public schools and leave, but to insist that they become better.
Well, and you talk about that a little bit. Of course, I might just give the end conclusion. You had one that went to Oral Roberts and graduated there, some that went to Liberty. But you argue that many in the King family might have said, we might have to pull our kids out of the public schools because of the public schools that are there. No offense to public school teachers or public education, but you made some decisions early on about what you needed to do for your kids. Talk about that.
Throughout our whole family, even my dad, my uncle, and my aunt, they went to public schools and private schools. My children did. I did. So we must always find the best educational opportunity available for our family. Homeschooling is good. Private school, public school, I say people, hey, let's just all go over to the public school, lay down on the floor and just pray for about 3 hours. It'll get better. But I haven't gotten a community group together to do that yet. Yes. I'm still looking for that team.
So again, just another challenge that came from that. A couple more I just wanted to take before we take a break, and that is you talk about this idea of guard your heart. Again, another very important message that we need to learn in this culture when we are assaulted by so many false messages. And as a believer, you've really struggled with the fact that we're trying to raise now your grandchildren in a culture where we really need to teach them the principles of guarding their heart.
When we guard our heart, and we're talking about love and romance, I was brought up where one man married one woman, they raised children together, and we were, honest to goodness, always treated kindly. We were taught parental authority, but we had opportunities for our personalities to grow. I know the world is not that way today. That's another reason people like you, your listeners, they're saying, what worked then? And can we go back to that? So I was the first in our family, I believe, to get a divorce. And that was very disappointing to many people in my family. Now, did Christ forgive me? Am I restored? Am I okay? Yes. But when we look at conditions of society that make us break the pattern that works, then we need to go back and examine why did that happen and what really works. And so I've got friends my age who say, I'm going on a date. And that means sexual intimacy outside of marriage. And I tell them, I say, well, I don't do that. I said, I tried that a long time ago and it didn't work. My granddaddy told me that wasn't a good idea. So it's okay to say that to our friends, that we're better than that. So let's go back to the standard of love and marriage, and then babies, and they should come in that order.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about this in the book that your father and mother actually courted. And that would be a word that some of our listeners might not know about courtship, although now there's been a resurgence of that. There have been people who've had on this program to talk about that. Well, what courting meant back then was your father would come over and meet your mother at the family with the intention of marriage, so that all the romance and all the relationship was where there were, in a sense, people that were providing
supervised. It was actually
guidance.
supervised.
Yeah.
And I say this, and people say she's out of it, she's just old. But only married people should go on dates, because date means sexual intimacy. Courtship, chase butterflies, balloons, go get ice cream, go bowling, go to the movies. Oh, that's fun. That's good. But reserve the intimacy to avoid heartbreak and just wait till you get married.
Well, and I know when you wanted to go to your senior prom, your father wanted to drive you.
He did.
What did you say to him?
Daddy, that's old-fashioned. You can't do that. But thank God he and Mother stayed up all night praying. Because we did go with a group. We didn't go alone, but we had a little car accident.
You had a car accident. And he
And
always
Daddy
liked
was
to remind
right.
you.
He was right. He said, if I had driven you, oh, Daddy, yeah, you were right.
Yeah, and there's a sense in which, obviously, as you said, that's a little old-fashioned, but there was some wisdom in the way in which we used to bring families together. Young people today are really not even knowing where the boundaries were. We've oftentimes said in the 1960s that the baby boom generation knew where the lines were and intentionally crossed them, but the millennial generation, they're crossing lines they don't even know exist. And
That's
it seems
true.
to me that maybe we as parents need to get a little more involved in the lives of our kids.
Can
and
I point
prevent
something
them.
out real fast right there? Baby boomers, as you mentioned. And I came in on the tail of that. So I'm actually at 63, just at the end of the boomers. And then you had Generation X, free love, do what you want to do. Everything is material. Just get all that you can get materially. Generation Y says, why should I care? The world's so bad. Forget about it. But now in the millennial, a Generation Z, the last alphabet before you go back to A, and it represents the number 8, new beginnings. And so they're the ones that will say, courting, define that for me. Let me think about that. Let's see if that'll work. So we're going to see some young people rising that will listen to these rules, I think.
Going to take a break, and we've been talking about family and guarding your heart and some of those. We've also talked a little bit about life, and we'll come back because certainly you cannot talk with Dr. Alveda King without talking about the pro-life initiative she's been involved with. But let's also give you a chance to join the conversation. We've only worked our way through about half of the book, and we'll get through the rest of it, I'm sure, in the next half. But also want to give you a chance if you want to make a comment, ask a question. We are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Alveda King. The new book just coming out, King Rules, 10 Truths for You, Your Family, and Our Nation to Prosper. And it is a great book which is full of life principles, but also a great biography and autobiography of some of the people in the King family. We'll continue our conversation and take your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this.
I will glorify with all my life. Let your glory shine down. Let your glory shine down.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Let's open the phones if you'd like to join our conversation today as we have Dr. Alveda King in studio. 1-800-351-1212. If you have comments about the civil rights movement or where we are today in terms of racial reconciliation, maybe the legacy of the King family, those are certainly relevant. Earlier in the year, of course, we talked about the letter from Birmingham jail, and of course, we're coming up on the anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So lots of topics to put on the table, and we would certainly welcome your phone calls. First half hour, we've talked about life and family. Let's get into some of the justice issues. Let's talk for a moment, though, about this idea of defending life before we get into justice, because there are some, Dr. King, that say, well, we should fight for social justice, but we don't really talk about the life issue. But you can't talk about justice for people that are born if you start aborting people before they're born. And I know that you've recognized the connection between life and justice, haven't you?
I have, and my uncle, Martin M.L., once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And he says you can't just provide justice for one group of people and not for others. And so he would certainly care about the little babies in the womb. So from conception or fertilization until natural death, you want to be fair to the babies in the womb, the babies who are born. As people begin to grow up and have issues with things like poverty and other problems, people who are ill and elderly. So you want to do the same thing and say, even when the Bible is very clear about how we should live and how we should act. And if we have to encounter folks that maybe need to be brought back, to just take a read of it. You don't do that with judgment and with hatred. And he said in his 1967 Christmas sermon, when we love people, when we respect the human personality, we won't kill anybody. And so it was so very clear with all of his lessons and words. He said that life is sacred. He said, don't be like the Romans who committed infanticide. He just went on and on with all of his words and lessons. So I know that he would say, be kind to those who are preborn. He called them the unborn.
The unborn.
And the preborn or the unborn, to the little people, to the mature people, to the sick people, and to the elderly.
One of the things I appreciate about the book that you've also done is you have the various links to the speeches and sermons and writings and websites of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others, and so those are very helpful. But when we talk about this issue of life, I think you've also got to be concerned, and I know you've written about this before, we've heard you speak about this, the history of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, and how this has been so devastating to the African American community. And as a pro-life leader in the African American community, I know you've spoken to this issue many times.
Margaret Sanger said that colored people are like weeds. They need to be exterminated. Let's not let that word get out. Let's cultivate some of their leaders to help us manage that message. I'm paraphrasing it. She tried to give Martin Luther King Jr. in 1966 the Maggie, or the Margaret Sanger Award. I think Hillary Clinton just received it recently. And he did not go. His wife attended the ceremony. She read a speech that someone else wrote, and she accepted it in his name, sort of like Mrs. Barbara Bush or Mrs. Laura Bush, Mrs. Coretta Scott King. Those three ladies were pro-choice.
Yeah.
But their husbands, pro-life.
Yes.
And that was the case with Martin Luther King Jr. Many people just don't know that.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have clarified the record on that. And that leads to the next one, because you have a chapter here about justice, and certainly justice should roll down like water. Some of the great speeches and sermons by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but it seems to me that we still need to fight for social justice. How is that part of the King legacy today? Give us some examples, if you might.
That is part of our legacy, and people like to attribute the nonviolent, peaceful movement that my uncle led, joined by my dad, A.D. King, Uncle Emil and A.D., and they want to say, well, he learned all that from Gandhi. But he really learned it from Christ. He just used Gandhi's methods. Yeah. And to care for the poor, the needy, because there is a chapter on caring for the needy as well. Yeah. But to care for all people, all ethnicities. There's one race, the human race. Acts 17:26, all people are created from one blood. But the different ethnic groups, the different people group. And so to just have justice for all people, not to break people into categories and make special categories of justice or righteousness, justice and righteousness coming together.
You know, that idea of nonviolence was something that Daddy King talked about as well. So when people try to always attribute all of that to Gandhi, there was a sense in which in the Christian family that you grew up in was this idea that if we're going to be effective in reaching and pricking the conscience of others, we need to do this in a nonviolent way. And that was certainly something that came from your grandfather.
Granddaddy, Daddy King, he talked about, he said, we have faith, hope, and love. And I'm not going to stoop so low as to let any person cause me to hate him. And he said, I will not do that. And so he was very peaceful, very nonviolent. They were not allowed to fight among themselves as siblings. My children cannot. My grandchildren cannot. We just don't do it.
That is just an incredible principle. Okay, you mentioned care for the needy. This is certainly one of the ideas that was part of the principles of the NAACP and the King legacy and the rest. But today, Dr. King, lots of times people think, well, we care for the needy. That means we need to send more money to Washington, D.C. We need to send more money to Albany, New York, Sacramento, California, Austin, Texas. But caring for the needy, at least the way your family talked about it, was the responsibility of Christians and the church to reach out to people in the community, right?
Well, Granddaddy talked about the least of these, caring for the least of these. Martin Luther King, Uncle, and Mel talked about the Good Samaritan. Daddy talked about the miracles of Christ, how he healed the sick and healed the blind and helped the people. And so if that Good Samaritan, for example, is on the side of the street and you walk by and say, I'll send a check back, somebody will help him. That's one thing, but to look and say, this man is broken or this lady hurt, broken, and stop. Give them a glass of water or whatever and say, let me help you up and let me put you in a place where you're safe, and I'll come back and check on you. So in order to really care about somebody, you have to touch them. You have to know that person. You have to love that person. And so we can sometimes feel good just by going through the grocery store and giving $1 for the charity there. But to really stop, care about that person, like the Good Samaritan stopped and cared for that person by the side of the road. I remember Uncle Emil's sermon, and I heard him preach that one. And he said, the question is not what will happen to him if I don't stop, but what will happen to me.
Yes. Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Our hearts have to come alive to help others.
And again, the idea of helping the needy wasn't so much a hand out as a hand up. In other words, to give people an opportunity to empower them, to help them be successful, to be all that they are in Jesus Christ.
To be all that they are in Jesus Christ, to participate in a society that's whole, and to know that they're contributing to it. I would always say, when I was a state legislator, I was elected in the 70s. I was a very young woman then, and they had welfare, and I kept saying, change that to workfare. If somebody's going to get assistance and they need it, but let them go out and maybe help plant flowers, and so the streets won't look so bad, or help, give them skills to do things to contribute to the society where we all live, so that they will take ownership in it.
We also need to maybe come back to the other principle you talked about a minute ago, and that is the issue of peace. We talked about that sort of in terms of nonviolence, but let's recognize that your uncle received a Nobel Peace Prize and spoke on that. Matter of fact, that's one of the messages that you talk about in the book. But today we need to hear that message of peace once again, don't we? With all the strife and the conflict that is taking place, you turn on a lot of talk shows, not this one, but a lot of talking head shows and people arguing all the time, conflict in the streets. What can we learn from the Bible and even from the King legacy about peace?
Well, here I am paraphrasing his speech again, but I looked at it because I always understood that he was not even a person who was excited about receiving awards. He wanted to serve others.
Yes.
He was not looking for awards. So his answer when he received it, he says, okay, I accept this, not for myself, but on behalf of all the people of the world. And he says, and as I accept that, if we want to have peace, we have to have peace in the ghetto, on the streets, in the boardroom, and to really care about people. He said, you're not going to get peace by bombing and blowing up people, but you're going to do it by loving people. I'm paraphrasing his speech, but he really understood that, and he accepted that award and gave all of the money back to the civil rights movement. And so peace can never be attained with war. Not saying we'll never have war, because there will be war and rumors of wars. We know that. But the ultimate solution is through nonviolent peaceful conflict resolution. And that is what he supported. My daddy, my granddaddy, I do. And in our family, we try to do that.
You know, one of the things that very good endorsement you received from former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, is Alveda King has always understood, as did her uncle and her father, that people must change from the inside out. Changes in the law are valuable, but changes in the human heart give the law its authority. And goes on to talk about the book, and certainly that illustrates, again, this idea of peace. Peace comes from the inside rather than from the outside. And we are talking today with Dr. Alveda King, a former college professor, author, mentor, stage and screen actress, Georgia State legislator, and presidential appointee, to mention just a few. And you sort of picked up some of the bits and pieces already, but we're trying to pull it all together, and we will do so in our last segment. If you'd like to join us, I know most of you want to just sit back and listen, but if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us for a few more minutes, Dr. Alveda King, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to our first caller, Robert in California, listening on KYCC. Robert, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I really like your guest today. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life, and I just am overjoyed that she is too, because I
think we've got too many dogs in the background.
Oh, my goodness, Robert.
That's okay. But, you know, it is important that you have become a very visible kind of pro-life icon, if you will. And we've really needed some of those individuals, because I have been very concerned about how abortion has affected, especially the minority community. And we are able to close down some abortion clinics, but I still notice that a lot of these abortion clinics are located near African American communities, Hispanic American communities. And I think some of the legacy of Margaret Sanger still is out there. And I'm picking up maybe even from Robert that he's grateful to be alive, even if he has, perhaps a disability of some sort. So talk about that.
Well,
if you might.
Robert, and it's good to hear from you too, and your little doggies. We heard them kind of chiming in. And people ask me, they say, well, but King Rules is not a pro-life book. I said, life, every aspect of human life, no matter how old someone is or young, or how they look, or how much money they have, their physical condition, all of that is so very important. The value of the human personality. And so part of my message definitely is pro-life, but pro-family, pro-human being, pro-Jesus. And so it's just such a positive book that's going to contribute to all of that. And everyone has value. Every human being is precious. Every human being has a valuable contribution to make. And we may not, I even say to young people sometimes, I have 4 sons and 2 daughters and 6 grandsons and 3 granddaughters right now. And I'll say, I want you to look well and feel good, but it's not your outfit. It's not your shoes or your jeans or your dress that makes you look good. When you put on those shoes or jean or that dress, you make the dress or the jeans or the shoes look good. And so it's what's inside of us. And that is the gift of life that is given to every person.
Well said. Let's go to Arkansas. Rose, thank you for calling today. You're on with Dr. Alveda King.
Hi, I just wanted to say I really appreciate y'all. And, when I was younger, abortion wasn't that big of a deal to me. I knew it was wrong for me as a Christian. But as I get older and I see how many blacks are aborted now, I guess it really bothers me that preachers don't preach more from the pulpit and tell their people the way it is, that it's wrong. And it bothers me that our country, so the mothers are supposed to be the nurturers, the big protectors, and God must look down on us and just see a country of murderers.
Wow.
Well, Rose, you heard me a little while ago when I said I was in Israel and I went to the Mount of Olives and where Jesus wept, and how my grandfather taught us why Jesus did weep. But then remember now, we're going to get to the end of my book soon, joy,
yes.
Finding that joy. So God does look at that, and it breaks his heart, which is why he sends people like you, so you express your concern honestly on the radio, or me to tell the truth, or when we get these wonderful questions about Margaret Sanger and things like that, the courage that it would take Kerby as our host to ask those kinds of questions. God is behind all of this. And so he's bringing us to a conclusion because he wants us to have joy. And so if there's anybody listening who's like me, I had 2 abortions and a miscarriage because of damage that was done in the process of all the other things that I tried to hold secret until I repented and was set free and healed. And so that's God's goal, to get us healed. So even if you did what I did, and I regret those. But today I'm a woman full of joy, and you can have joy. You can have peace. And so remember that God cares and he loves you. So thank you for being courageous enough to express your concern.
Certainly. That last truth is the joy that you certainly are expressing, and the importance also of forgiveness, because I remember just recently we were talking with Rebecca St. James about her book and her movie participation, because we were talking about women exploited by abortion, and there is forgiveness and there is joy and there is an opportunity to see healing. And I know that you certainly would encourage anybody that's maybe still struggling with a decision they made. Maybe they are a woman exploited by abortion, or maybe it was a husband or a boyfriend that did not have a chance to make a positive impact. The good news is there are lots of pregnancy resource centers around the country, and all sorts of ways in which people can find hope and healing in the midst of this.
And let me suggest, around holidays like Mother's Day or Father's Day, Grandparents' Day, any of those times, that's a time to extend grace, forgiveness, and love to those that are close to you. And if you are a mother or father that is experiencing the pain and grief, try Rachel's Vineyard Silent No More Awareness campaign. I did, and they helped me. My friend Kevin Burke writes about fathers who regret lost fatherhood, and there's healing for that too.
We only have a few minutes left, and one of the links we have on our website is kingrulesbook.com, and I've clicked on there, and there's a place for people to purchase the book. There's a place to read the endorsements, and there's also a free chapter there. But what is so fun is you have a chapter or a section there called Album. Now, in your book, you've got a couple of pictures, but here you've got all sorts of pictures. So, matter of fact, pictures of you when you were much younger, and the family tree and all the rest. So talk about what people will find when they go to kingrulesbook.com.
You'll find pictures of A.D. King, my dad, and Uncle ML and Aunt Chris when they were young. You'll find a young mother, Naomi King. You'll find me as a state legislator, or a picture that I wrote to the father of 5 of my children one time. I'm sitting out in the grass, and people say, "Why'd you put that there?" I said, "Well, life was not always sad for me." And you'll find the funeral picture of Martin Luther King Jr. I think I did include that. I think I did. So there are many things that you'll find, and the King family legacy. You'll see some wedding pictures. We had quite a few weddings, and they were wonderful. Aunt Christine and her husband, Isaac Sr., have been married over 50 years. We were able to celebrate that recently. So there are so many things that you'll find there. The days of the Civil Rights Movement, when they were guns and dogs and billy clubs. I think I put a little bit of that. So there's just a little of the family experience of the King family legacy.
Also, we have a link to Alveda King Ministries. And, of course, your verse is Galatians 5:6, and faith works by love. And so if people want to know about some of your projects, communicate with you, their email addresses and all sorts of things. And I know that every once in a while, if somebody makes it to Atlanta and looks you up, you've had an opportunity to take people through a true civil rights tour right there in Atlanta, Georgia. Talk about that if you want.
I actually do. We go around the Martin Luther King site and look at some of the colleges and historically black colleges and universities. And we just go around the city and we talk about how it was then and how it is today. And it's just a wonderful experience. And I talk about healing and forgiveness and segregation and what the answer to that is. And we just walk around and enjoy the city. Well,
it has just been so delightful to have you in studio. We've had you by phone before. It's the first time we got a chance to be at least in this studio, and it is a new studio. You might say it's pretty
very nice. I looked around, and this little board here, I sat there and I said, "Oh man, this is just the top of the line."
Yeah.
I have enjoyed this.
Well, it's been great to have you in studio, and I understand you might be coming back sometime in the future, so if you do, I'd love to get you back in studio and talk about some of these pro-life issues. But thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Dr. Alveda King, let me again mention that we have lots of great resources. If you would like to listen to this again, click on that podcast button and you can listen to it. If you'd like to send it to someone who needs to hear about it, that is certainly possible. We have the trailer, which is about a minute and a half. It's something I would encourage you to watch. Then hit that share button. Put it on your blog or your Facebook page or something like that. We have articles about the various issues we've been talking about here today. And most importantly, we have links to Dr. Alveda King Ministries as well as kingrulesbook.com. All of it available at our website, pointofview.net. So please take the time to find out a little bit more. And when we come back, we're going to get into some news items today. But I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation with Dr. King. We look forward to the next opportunity. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after these important messages.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
With you adore you. I can't stop thinking about you. Jesus, I love you. How I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, we spent some time talking with Dr. Alveda King, and if you still want to ask a question or make a comment, you are free to do so. But I'm going to move on to some of the issues in the news. We have posted quite a number of articles, but front and center has been the decision to trade 5 Taliban terrorists, I guess is the best word to use, from Guantanamo for an Idaho paratrooper by the name of Bergdahl, Sergeant Bergdahl. This is an individual that, of course, has been actually held by the Taliban for some time, and there are lots of issues associated with this, not the least of which is does it make sense to trade 5 individuals who are in Guantanamo, part of the Taliban, for 1 American? Number 2, should we be relating to the Taliban? Number 3, does this not perhaps give encouragement for the capture of other Americans so that they would have the hope, that is the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, of being able to free some of their leaders? And then, of course, some of the other issues associated with this, about whether or not Sergeant Bergdahl was and the words they use right now, allegedly a deserter. Of course, you want to say that because we don't want to do anything to sully the reputation of anybody that was willing to put on the uniform of the United States, but certainly lots of questions associated with this today. And this is something that we'll spend just a little bit of time talking about, then move on to some other issues, including the Veterans Administration. But let me start with the piece that I've posted here from Neil McCabe that appeared in Human Events, and we have that on our website if you would like to read that in its entirety. But he talks about the fact that the other day the Secretary of Defense announced that the paratrooper Sergeant Bowie Bergdahl, the only American held as a prisoner of war in Afghanistan, was released in exchange for 5 Taliban fighters detained at the naval station Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And it said that, again, the family was informed by President Obama that their long wait for his return will be over. That comes from Chuck Hagel, who, of course, is serving right now as the Secretary of Defense. Hagel said he informed Congress of the decision to transfer the Gitmo 5 to Qatar, from where they will begin their lives. Sergeant Bergdahl is now under the care of U.S. military after being handed over by his captors in Afghanistan. And he said, we will give him all the support he needs to help him recover from this ordeal, and we are grateful that he will soon be reunited with his family. Then Bergdahl, then a private first class with the Spartans of the 25th Infantry Division's 4th Brigade Combat Team, disappeared on June 30th, 2009, while deployed in particular province in Afghanistan. He is, I mentioned just a minute ago, a native of Idaho, where he was homeschooled and studied ballet before joining the Army. President Barack Obama issued his own statement from the White House. Today, the American people are pleased that we will be able to welcome home Sergeant Bergdahl, held captive for nearly 5 years. On behalf of the American people, he says, I was honored to call his parents to express our joy that they can expect his safe return, mindful of their courage and sacrifice throughout this ordeal. Today, we will also remember the many troops held captive and who remain missing and unaccounted for in America's past wars. Sergeant Bergdahl's recovery is a reminder of Americans' unwavering commitment to leave no man or woman in uniform behind on the battlefield. And as we find relief in Bowie's, that is Mr. Bergdahl, Sergeant Bergdahl's recovery, our thoughts and prayers are with those other Americans whose release we continue to pursue. There are all sorts of comments that have been posted. For example, Alan West, who is an individual we'd like to get on the program again somewhat soon, served as a former member of Congress for a while, and certainly a retired Army lieutenant, said he was concerned about the unanswered questions surrounding Bergdahl's absence from duty. He says, even Bergdahl's abduction is puzzling. According to the Washington Post, the Army infantryman assigned to a unit from Alaska was taken captive after walking off his base in the eastern province of Paktia, which is one of the provinces in Afghanistan, a decision that confounded his comrades and commanders in Afghanistan. And then he goes on to say, I spent 2.5 years in Afghanistan, and an American soldier just doesn't walk off of a forward operating base or anywhere alone. It was the standard operating procedure, even in Kabul, that you never went anywhere without a battle buddy. Furthermore, leaving the installation required signing out with destination time of departure and estimated time of return. Of course, raising the question as to what was in particular his actions. And I thought it was striking that when, of course, you had individuals going out this week in the talking head shows, this was an issue that was simply not brought up. This particular article I have in front of me here, Susan Rice disregards question about whether Bergdahl deserted the Army with the comment, that's not the point. And if you want to go and look at the particular transcript, you find something very interesting because, as it says, top Obama administration officials on Sunday avoided question about whether Sergeant Bergdahl, who was released by the Taliban in exchange for 5 detainees on Saturday, deserted the Army. ABC News This Week host George Stephanopoulos asked National Security Advisor Rice whether such allegations would be investigated, and if it is found that he did, will be disciplined, or has he already paid the price, was the question, of course, that George Stephanopoulos asked. It's a good question to ask. What was the response that came back from National Security Advisor Susan Rice? She said, quote, certainly anybody who has been held in those conditions in captivity for 5 years has paid an extraordinary price, but that is really not the point. The point is he's back. He's going to be safely reunited with his family. He served the United States with honor and distinction. She went on then to say, we'll have the opportunity to learn eventually what happened in the past years, but what's more important now is his health and well-being, and that he has the, she says, I guess that's a typo on her part, he has the opportunity to recover in peace and security and be reunited with his family, which is why this is such a joyous day. So the argument coming from the talking head shows is, we're glad he's back. We don't really care whether he was a deserter, but certainly those are some issues that need to be resolved in the future. When we come back, though, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what this sort of means, because after all, if we are going to be trading with the Taliban, number one, the question is, will this increase the likelihood of a capture of another American soldier or two, hoping then that this would be used to trade for other detainees in Guantanamo? There are certainly questions about whether or not this is completely legal, because after all, President Obama is supposed to follow a law that actually requires that he inform Congress 30 days in advance of a prisoner release from Guantanamo. The argument was his health was failing, and so the urgency of now, haven't we heard this before, justified breaking the law. So those are just a few of the issues on the table, but I'd like to get your comments and thoughts as well. What about this idea of trading detainees in Guantanamo
for an American soldier? What about the need for the president to inform Congress? And was this issue of whether or not he deserted an important issue to raise, or is it simply a tangential issue? Because, of course, those are merely allegations at the moment. But I'd love to get your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212. If you have some thoughts about the release of Sergeant Bergdahl, we'll come back right after these messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if we are to be more effective in communicating biblical values and morality, we need to understand basic strategy. That is one of the themes in the book Rules for Patriots by Steve Deace. The middle part of the book provides some needed coaching on how we can all be more effective in communicating and convincing. One of his principles is that we should never accept the premise of your opponent's argument. A premise is the assumption of an argument that is meant to justify a conclusion. A good example would be the pro-life debate. What happens if the premise of the argument is over reproductive choice rather than sanctity of life? The pro-choice side is more likely to win. This can be applied to various constitutional issues. As Christians, we believe that God grants us rights. We have the right to call on Him. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Therefore, government has the responsibility to protect religious freedom through the First Amendment, as well as through other legislative acts. However, the premise in many government discussions is to give rights, and that government gives rights and thus has the right to take away or constrain certain rights. It all depends on the premise that is used to come to that conclusion. God grants us the right to self-defense. Therefore, our government has the obligation to protect and enforce the Second Amendment. However, if you come to a much different conclusion if the debate is about whether individuals should own firearms. Steve Deace was on one talk show where the debate was about how much more taxes should be levied on the rich. When it came time for him to speak, he asked a simple question. How many on the panel and in the studio audience got a job from a poor person? He noted that every job he had came from a rich person. That allowed him to focus the discussion on whether we should punitively punish people who produce jobs. If we're to be effective in communicating biblical values and morality, we should never accept the premise of our opponent's argument. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212 here on Point of View. Let's, if we can, just for a minute before I take some of those phone calls, point out that the Wall Street Journal today said the return of Sergeant Bergdahl from the clutches of the Taliban is a cause for relief for his family and all Americans, but there's no denying that the price of his recovery is high. The Obama administration swapped 5 of the hardest cases in Guantanamo in a fashion that will encourage terrorists to kidnap more Americans to win the release of more prisoners. They go on to say, this does not mean that we agree with Republicans who say President Obama broke the law by failing to inform Congress 30 days in advance of the prisoner release from Guantanamo. Presidential power is never stronger than in the role of the commander-in-chief. Congress did not attempt to use its comparatively strong power of the purse. Instead, Congress's Gitmo language sought bluntly to constrain Mr. Obama's wartime decision-making. They went on to say this is unconstitutional, as the president averred in a statement at the time he signed the bill. They use this, what is called signing statements, and they go on to point out that Mr. Obama and his liberal friends denounced George W. Bush for similar signing statements in one more anti-terror irony of the presidency. Readers should watch to see if the same politicians and newspapers that assailed Mr. Bush are more forgiving when a Democratic president is using the same war powers. So a lot of people say maybe it isn't unconstitutional, it isn't breaking the law, because in his signing statements, President Obama disagreed with that part of the law. That was something that was used by President Bush, and it was used by others as well. But nevertheless, we'll get into all the details. But a couple of issues on the table. Number one, does this increase the likelihood that another American might be kidnapped? Did we pay too high a price for the recovery of Sergeant Bergdahl? And I'm going to leave to the side, but certainly we can address that, the alleged desertion, whether or not that was a big issue. Some have raised that question. It was raised, of course, by George Stephanopoulos. It was kind of set aside, and we'll see where you go on that issue. If we have time, we might get into some other topics, but I think we'll stay here for a while, simply because this is kind of the story of the day, and it helps us refocus our time and attention on Afghanistan, in large part simply because of the president's speech last week at West Point, which we talked about on Friday. But let's take some phone calls, see what your comments might be in this regard. We'll start in North Carolina and talk to Robin. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi. I wanted to share with you that this is an issue that goes back many decades. My own father is still listed as MIA in the country of Laos.
Wow.
And there was information during the 1980s that Vietnam actually was holding living Americans, and there was a Secret Service person who came forward and said that he was aware of a visit from the Vietnamese to the White House offering 103 Americans, and the United States refused to purchase them because they said that we don't negotiate, basically, for prisoners of war. And as hard as it is to say this, I agree. I think that you put more Americans at risk. I think it's a horrible precedent to be setting because you do encourage, we see this in Mexico. I mean,
sure,
it goes on all the time with the drug lords there. So I know that there was a lawsuit at one time just because the family members in our situation felt like my father was not or should not be considered a prisoner of war because we had not declared war in the country of Laos, and that treaty should not apply to him. But anyway.
Well, I think you got some good points. First of all, let's come back to one that you just said in passing, and that is when we don't declare war, and we haven't really officially done that since World War II. The rest have been military actions in Korea, certainly Desert Storm and all the rest. I mean, I don't know why we can't have a declaration of war for all sorts of reasons, that especially since we are sending people into a war zone. But second of all, there is a very important principle there. If you start trading various prisoners, prisoner of war, political prisoners, whatever it is, you probably increase more of that. When you reward individuals for taking someone captive, then you are going to have more of that. That's just basic human nature. So I think you probably can speak to that better than anyone else because you still wonder what the MIA means in that region of the world. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today.
You're welcome.
Yes. Oh, great way to start out. Robin, thank you. From North Carolina, let's go to Kentucky, WYGE. Marshall, what would you like to share with us today?
Hi, Kerby. Thanks for taking my call. Appreciate the caller's last comments especially, but this issue raises so many myriad facets of this whole issue with the presidency, with his possible desertion, with the exchange of prisoners. So, it's hard to focus just on one point.
I know there's about 3 or 4 there on the table, but take them in order and we'll listen.
Okay. For one, I believe that it is never a good idea to reward terrorists for anything. If we have prisoners, suspected terrorists at Gitmo, we need to leave them there. We should never do prisoner exchanges with this type of of warfare that we're in. And we are in a war. I agree. Why in the world haven't we declared an official war? We have, unofficially, but we've not officially done that through the proper channels, as is customary of this administration. I believe that it's never appropriate to bypass the law, no matter what the situation is. And if Bergendahl is a deserter, then that needs to be dealt with, no matter what the circumstances are.
Sure.
If he deserted the Army and that precipitated his capture, then that's hurt him, and it's also hurt our country. And now we have a prisoner released from Gitmo, that could potentially do more harm than good. And we always want to make sure that we're honoring veterans, that we're honoring people who are in the military, who are sacrificing and putting their lives on the line. But at the same time, there is no price too high to be paid for those lives. But at the same time, we need to do it through the proper channels, and we need to exercise our strength as a country and see great leadership from our president on this issue.
Well, you've very well summarized those issues. I mean, I appreciate the president saying we leave no man or woman behind. Okay, so I on the one side, that's the plus column, but almost everything else ends up being on the negative side because we're going to reward terrorists. We're communicating with terrorists. There were some comments today by some people, I think they were State Department, I can't remember exactly, that this might open up more conversations with the Taliban. Really? These are our enemies. I mean,
yeah.
It's just
exactly.
I don't know. Hard to get your head around this, and I think you've done a very good job, Marshall, of summarizing some of the key issues. So thank you for joining us today. Any final comments?
No, thank you, Kerby. I appreciate you taking my call.
Well, appreciate you calling in. You added a lot to the conversation, and let's go, if we can, real quickly, and then we'll take some of these other calls after the break. But we've got a couple of minutes, so we'll go to Arizona, KNLB. Donna, thank you for calling today.
Hi, I read Alan West's column today.
Yes.
And it listed how many men died looking for this guy.
At least 6 that I know of.
Yes, and I think that's a tragedy. And the sergeant said that he left his weapons, he left his backpack, and then he asked some kids where the Taliban located. He really wanted to...
Sure sounds like it. Yeah.
And then to promote him to sergeant... and make this, and then I watched his father just a few minutes ago with his beard and speaking Arabic in front of the president. I mean, it's just disgusting. We need to wake up and we need to do something. And by the way, my husband put in 35 years in the Navy. He was shot down over Vietnam. I am a military wife that hates the way they're abusing our military these days.
Yes, we talk about that almost every Friday with Kelly Shackelford. He's got a whole division on just the impact that the issue of religious liberty. We're going to have Frank Gaffney soon, and he was certainly served in the Defense Department. He'll be with us in studio a couple of weeks, I think, from now. And we're going to be talking about what's happening in the military. And again, I wanted to use the word alleged because even if I think, and I'm pretty sure I agree, that Sergeant Bergdahl was a deserter, I will say that because I don't want to sully the uniform and the reputation of the military. So I do that not because I'm that convinced that he was captured or he was in a firefight, but that he just literally walked off and decided he's going to go to the other side. And, of course, the things he's written about in terms of hating America and embarrassed to be part of America, I think we already kind of know where he stands on those issues.
Sure. I just wanted that brought out because, in my mind, he shouldn't have a hero's welcome.
Well, thank you for your family and their service. I've said this time and time again, and I will continue saying it. We will never be able to thank those of you that served in uniform enough for the contribution you've made to this country. And Donna, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you.
We need to take a break, but when we come back, if you have some comments, maybe you had a little trouble getting through. Of course, we had a fast rush of phone calls. Let's open up this last half hour. Any other comments you have about trading with the Taliban, about Sergeant Bergdahl, and what we should have as our foreign policy? We would certainly welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. If those calls wind down a little bit, we'll move into a couple of other issues. We have learned a little bit more about the Veterans Administration and the solution. Oh, no surprise there. Oh, if we just spend more money in the Veterans Administration, these problems will go away. Really?
And we'll also talk about the latest assault on the First Amendment. Ted Cruz has a very important commentary. We'll talk about those things with you right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this.
Let your glory shine down. Let your glory shine down.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, we've got a bank of phone calls, but still an opportunity for a few of you to join us. So if you'd like to join us right now, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the return of Sergeant Bergdahl. Let me, before I take a phone call, just read one or two more paragraphs out of the Wall Street Journal because I love what they said today. The real problem with this prisoner swap, they say, is the message it conveys about American weakness, especially in the context of Mr. Obama's retreat from Afghanistan and elsewhere. The world's bagged actors have long perceived that the United States doesn't negotiate over hostages, in contrast to, say, France or Italy. This has made American soldiers and civilians less promising targets. The Taliban swap will change that perception and increase the likelihood that more Americans will be grabbed, not least in Kabul. Then they go on to say, and this is a bit of hyperbole, but maybe not. Don't be surprised if 9/11 plotter Khalid Sheikh Mohammed shows up on a list of future prisoner swap demands. Oh, boy. Andrew McCarthy, call your office. We're going to certainly get him on here. Frank Gaffney and some others. I think there are some very bad precedents here, but perhaps you disagree. You're welcome to agree or disagree. Let's give you a chance to join the conversation. Let's go to the state of Georgia this time. John, thank you for calling. What would you like to share with our audience? You're having a little trouble getting John there. I think maybe his cell phone's not doing so well. So, John, we'll come back to you. Let's see if we can get a better line here in a minute. We'll go to Dwayne in South Carolina first. Dwayne, thank you for joining us.
Dwayne, Kerby, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to point out that I'm about 42 years old. I remember when we had the hostages under the Carter administration, and every night Dan Rather would say so many days the hostages are in bondage, and then under the Reagan administration, those hostages were somehow released. Now, I'm not sure what kind of deal the Reagan administration made, but those hostages were released. And so I just want to point out what is the policy for, and I know I'm not talking apples and oranges because we're talking prisoner of war versus civilians, but the precedent was, and I'm not mistaken, I believe it was arms for hostages. I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong. So how do we reconcile now what the president has done? If there is a precedent and we don't negotiate with terrorists and we don't swap out hostages for, prisoners of war for prisoners of war, then is the president to be chastised, or is he following what we've done in the past?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, I think you've got a couple good questions. First of all, there are a lot of people that believe that the release of the hostages were intentionally done to embarrass Jimmy Carter. And you might remember that just as Ronald Reagan was taking the oath of office, they then announced from Tehran in Iran that the Americans were coming home. Now, there could have been some behind the wings deal, and I'm not so familiar with that since that was so many years ago, but I do know that a lot of people also suspected that it was done in part to embarrass Jimmy Carter, but also out of the just general fear from Ronald Reagan. I mean, there were some that were wondering if they still had hostages when Reagan came into office, whether he would order some kind of strike and turn Tehran into a parking lot. I mean, so it could have been out of fear. There may have been some negotiations, but let's give credit where credit is due, because you can go further into the Reagan administration and have Iran-Contra, and that's where you do see the kind of connections there in which they were selling arms and working to fund the Contras and all that scandal that unfolded in the Reagan administration. Let's come back to basic principles. There may be some times where backroom deals have been made, but the general policy has always been that the United States does not negotiate over hostages. And that, I think, according, as I mentioned just a minute ago, as I read from the Wall Street Journal, has probably made American soldiers and, most importantly, civilians less promising targets. The same kind of attitude that is held by Israel, not going to negotiate with terrorists, also, I think, has made Israeli citizens more secure. So that's a question that's certainly on the table today. And that's probably worth going back and seeing what we can learn from 1980. But in terms of recent precedent, that certainly is something a little bit different. I don't agree with the argument that the president actually is doing something that broke the law, because in his signing statement made it clear that he did not believe that he had to provide 30 days in advance to Congress. Those are the kind of demands that Congress places on a commander-in-chief. I don't think those are constitutional either, although it was never really challenged in the Supreme Court. But who needs to wait to the Supreme Court when you can see some things probably were unconstitutional in the first place? But let's take some more questions, because Dwayne asked a good one. I'm not sure I have a quick answer for it. So let's go to Robert in Texas and see what you would like to share with our listening audience today. Robert?
Yes, sir.
Yes. What would you like to say?
I told the lady a while ago, I feel like, I told the lady a while ago, I feel like if this man been captured, this man been captured for 5 years.
Yeah.
This man been captured for 5 years. For 5 years.
I think he's listening to his radio, so we're having some problem there. So we'll move on to another caller in Texas. Pamela, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I feel very strongly that we need to find a very accurate history book and mail it to the President of the United States, because every Marine can tell you what the shores of Tripoli are about. And that was during the founding years of the United States of America, when horrible ransoms were being charged and horrible prisoners' conditions were being subjected on civilians and our naval officers. And that was when we formed our policy not to negotiate to brigands and robbers and criminals. And the other thing that I have to say is, whether or not this man was a deserter, he was a volunteer. And if he volunteered for military service, because there are no conscriptions at this time in America, even 5 years ago, then he had no right to walk away. He could have just terminated his contractual agreement with the military. And I have no sympathy for him, because back in the day, both my brothers served their 2-year commitment because they weren't intelligent enough to get into college. And then because they served their 2-year commitment as a sort of a protest, I served my 2 years that I figured I owed the United States of America to. I think the president has sold all of the American soldiers, past and present. He sold them out.
Let me come back to your first point just before we take a break here, because it's a good history lesson and an opportunity for history. And that is, when George Washington came to power as the president, served his 2 terms, his 8 years, they already began to have a problem because the American Navy was very weak, to put it mildly. And so as a result, the Barbary pirates would oftentimes capture a ship, capture the American soldiers, sell them into slavery, and the only way to release them was to pay a ransom. And the ransom was bad enough under Washington, but it was almost sky high by the time that then John Adams served. And by the time then John Adams left office and Thomas Jefferson was the president, he finally said, enough is enough. We're not going to pay the ransom, but we're not going to keep our soldiers and our sailors and our merchant marines and others in a situation in limbo. So he sent the Marines to, and that's where the Marine hymn comes from, the shores of Tripoli, to deal with them face to face. And so it's a very important principle that we should learn. And a lot of people make a big deal about the fact that in the Library of Congress, there is a copy of the Quran by Thomas Jefferson. And as a matter of fact, one member of Congress decided that instead of taking the oath of office on a Bible, took the oath of office on a Quran. And he asked to have an opportunity to take the the oath of office on that Quran that was held by Jefferson. But it wasn't held by Thomas Jefferson, and he did not have a copy of that because he believed in the Muslims, but because he wanted to read what they believed. And it was after reading the Quran concluded that the only way to, quote, negotiate with the Muslims at that time in the early part of the 19th century was to send the Marines to the shores of Tripoli and deal with it effectively. So, Pamela, you've given us a great history lesson. I have one of those mandatory breaks, so let's take a break. When we come back, any more comments that you have, we'll give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. And if you would like to join us, we would love to hear your comments. But I also want to give you just a brief rundown, and it won't be a short one, but a brief rundown of the 5 Gitmo prisoners. These are dangerous individuals. They'll show up again on the battlefield. I'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just a minute ago, I mentioned the fact that a member of Congress used Jefferson's copy of the Quran to actually take the oath of office. And in case you were wondering about the details, that was Congressman Keith Ellison. And I looked it up just to double check, make sure I had it right. It is a 2-volume copy of the Quran that was owned by Jefferson. It was originally published in 1764. He actually sold it to the Library of Congress along with many of his other books after the British had burned the Library of Congress. So the Library of Congress was burned in 1812 by the British. In one of those interesting stories, they burned the White House, of course, when James Madison, Dolly Madison, had to run out with some of the portraits. And so he actually sold that 6,400 volume collection, and one of those was this copy of the Quran, which they moved from the Library of Congress, going through underground passages and allowing then Keith Ellison to take the oath of office with his hands on the top of a Quran rather than the Bible, because Keith Ellison is a Muslim. So nevertheless, just wanted to add that in case some of you were wondering about that idea. And the reason most people believe that Thomas Jefferson had the Quran is he wanted to understand what these Muslims that were taking American sailors and merchant marines as hostage wanted, and he understood only so well that the only kind of response they were going to react to is a military response. That's why we sent the Marines to the shores of Tripoli. Pamela, thank you for reminding about us that point. Let's go to a few calls real quickly. We'll go to Kentucky this time. Dean, what would you like to share with us today?
Well, when Obama first took office, his first objective was to close down Guantanamo Bay. Well, since that didn't materialize, he said, well, I will see this thing is closed one way or the other, so now he's going to make sure he closes it to attrition.
I think so.
He has put all of our soldiers, as well as any other American citizen that might be in a position where, in harm's way, we might say, where they might be kidnapped. So he will start trading these prisoners to get these people released, which is contrary, and has been for some time, to our ethics. And this is one way that he will make sure that he gets one thing accomplished while he's in office. He will see Guantanamo Bay shut down as far as holding these type of prisoners.
Well, he's going to have to trade a lot more prisoners to close it down, but again, with death and trading, eventually you probably would end up closing it down because the need for it would cease to exist. So we'll see how that plays itself out. One of the biggest surprises for a lot of the liberal or progressive supporters of President Obama is that now, 5 years into his office, Guantanamo still is going and hasn't been closed down and probably won't be closed down anytime soon. I think most of them expected that would happen in the first year. Certainly by the second year, I don't think any of them would have predicted that in the second term of President Obama's administration, Guantanamo would still exist. But nevertheless, it does. And 5 of those individuals were moved from Guantanamo, Gitmo, to Qatar. Now, let me give you the basics. The 5 are supposed to stay in Qatar for a year. That might be the case. They won't be in the battlefield for a year, but as the Wall Street Journal points out, they'll probably spend their year boning up on the Taliban and al-Qaeda war plans. Now, why have they never been released in the past? Because after all, there have been some individuals that have been released from Guantanamo, and some of those have shown up again in the battlefield. These 5 were not released because even the Obama administration, I want to say again, the one that probably is least likely to have constrained these individuals, approved these 5 individuals for indefinite detention. So as a result, they were all deemed as high security risks by the Joint Task Force in Guantanamo. The Obama administration agreed with that. You can guarantee that the Bush administration would have agreed with that. And let me just give you, since we're almost out of time here, a little bit of a look at 2 of those individuals, Mohammed Fazi and Mullah Nurullah Nori. They were, first of all, both present in the fortress in North Afghanistan back in November of 2001 when Taliban prisoners at that time revolted against their captors in the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance. You might remember that prison explosion that took place, and CIA operative Johnny Michael Spann died. He was the first American to die in Afghanistan. So they were part of, if you will, that prison riot that led to his death, the first American casualty. They're also very much, both of those individuals are suspected of war crimes for the mass murder of Shiites in Afghanistan before September 11th, 2001. Recognize that Muslims don't even just kill other non-Muslims. Muslims kill other Muslims. And so this Taliban group And these two individuals that I've just mentioned, Mohammed Fauzi and Mullah Nurali Nori, were both accused of killing just masses of other Shiites in Afghanistan to purge out any kind of Muslim that they did not agree with. Now, Mohammed Fauzi is also well known because he was a close advisor to Mullah Omar, and he is the Taliban leader who escaped U.S. capture and is somewhere expected to and probably living today in Pakistan. And so it's quite likely that this individual will hook up somehow with Mullah Omar eventually, and they'll be back in business setting up new possible attacks on troops and on civilians. So I just wanted to give you a real brief kind of overlook of these individuals. All 5 of these individuals were considered to be high security risk by the Joint Task Force in Guantanamo. This was accepted by the Obama administration. You can guarantee that it would have been accepted by the Bush administration. I think it would be accepted by anybody with any kind of common sense. And 2 of these individuals that I've just highlighted here, if we were to actually take them to The Hague for war crimes, probably would be persecuted and prosecuted under that as well. So I think we are dealing with some pretty dangerous individuals who most likely will show up on the battlefield. Well, that's all we have for today. I want to maybe in the next couple of days when we have some time, spend a little bit of time looking at some other things that are unfolding in the news, but this was kind of front and center today, so we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the return of Sergeant Bergdahl, and as thrilled as we are for that individual to be rejoining his family, certainly there are some very important questions that are still surrounding this decision to trade various individuals in Guantanamo with one individual that was held captive in Afghanistan. Let me mention that tomorrow we will get back into the issue of the IRS scandal, and the reason for that is we have Hans von Spaskowski, who is with the Heritage Foundation, and he began to notice that instead of the current administration saying, okay, we probably did too much in terms of IRS oversight of these 501c4 organizations. Instead of backing out and saying, okay, we made a mistake here, we need to reevaluate our policies, they decided instead to double down and to find ways without congressional approval to implement many of those regulations against the various groups through the IRS. Now, we've been assured that indeed they are not going to do that right away, so it may not affect this election, but as Dr. von Spaskowski's pointed out, that's meaning, well, we won't do it today because everybody's looking at it, but as soon as we can direct people's attention to something else, like, for example, trading with the Taliban or whatever else, maybe the VA scandal, we'll try to implement these secretly. So we're going to be talking with him tomorrow about these IRS regulations, and any of you that have been trying to get a 501c3 or a 501c4 through the IRS know some of the roadblocks that are there. Then we're going to be talking with our good friend Marvin Olasky with World Magazine, and we'll come back to a couple of other very important stories. Let me just mention that on Wednesday, we'll be talking about some pro-life issues. Elizabeth Graham will be back with us in studio, as well with Christine Melchor. And then we have Dr. Ben Carson with us, a new book out. So lots to talk about this week, and I hope you'll join us every single day here on Point of View. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the book that's coming out by Dr. Alveda King, we have information about that on the website. We have a video, and we hope that you will visit the website pointofview.net and get the information that we want you to have so that you can purchase books, watch videos, have some articles, and educate yourself and your friends, neighbors, and coworkers. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Gerald for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.